Right.
Okay, I'm going to begin my presentation.
Yeah.
So. There's a saying that goes, if you keep doing the things you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And the same holds true for application development. If we keep doing the same process of waterfall deployments, we'll continue to see cost overruns and delays and impacts to getting delivery on time for our application. So what do we do? What are our options for coming up with something different that we can do to resolve these type of issues? So we're already starting by utilizing Agile development process, and that will take us so far, but another option is DevOps. So what is DevOps? Well, DevOps is a process of continuous deployment and continuous development that involves a large number of disciplines and a large group in the organization. It begins with the business, engaging the business for continuous planning. So we can't have continuous automation and deployment without having the business involved on a regular basis by providing input into the process. DevOps also involves development, continuous development and collaboration. So that the departments involved for DevOps would be obviously development, but as well as the business, BSAs, QA, and support operations, all working together as one team to deploy applications, deploy and develop applications. It involves a continuous and automated testing process. So not only is testing normally it's done by a separate department, QA, and DevOps is actually integrated into the development process. So no longer is there a separation in the two processes, but they become one and the same. So when you develop code, you also develop the testing modules to go along with it. And when you identify defects, you add into your testing code processes to test for that defect in the future as well. DevOps involves continuous deployment and automation in the build process. We should probably be doing deployments on a monthly basis here, and we should be looking at tools to help us automate that deployment process. DevOps involves, as I said, the support operations group, and this includes monitoring and feedback. So the support operations team, when defects are found, they would immediately bring the defects to the notice of the development team so they can identify the portions of code where the error occurred, and they can learn from their mistakes right away rather than 6 months later as it's normally being done now. What are the benefits of DevOps? Well, a great book for understanding what DevOps is and what the benefits can be from it are Leading the Transformation by Gary Groover and Tommy Mouser. These are HP directors of engineering for the HP LaserJet software and firmware application. It took them 2 years to implement DevOps in the HP, and after that 2 years, they noticed that they found that the development costs were reduced from 100 million to 55 million. There was a 140% increase in the number of products that they were able to develop, and the capacity for innovation went from 5% to 40%. So there's a lot of benefits to implementing DevOps in an organization, and if it can be done in a large organization such as HP, it can certainly be done here. So what are some of the requirements for implementing DevOps? DevOps requires strong leadership and reinforcement from management. It involves changing the culture of the entire organization and how they approach developing applications. In order for this to occur, it needs to be continually reinforced and promoted throughout the organization. There needs to be some long-term and achievable goals set forth. So a good analogy to this is President John F. Kennedy giving the mandate to send a man to the moon and return him safely to the earth. So the president set the vision, but the NASA as a team worked together to define how that's going to be done. And the same thing occurs with DevOps. It's team directed. The team decides how to achieve the vision and the goals set by the business. Requires commitment from all participants. It can't be done in a vacuum, and it requires that every member participate in the process. It requires direction and oversight and continual promotion. This is where the BSAs or the project managers or the Scrum Masters would come into play. So they would direct the DevOps process and make sure that we're actually doing DevOps and not just mimicking the processes, because you can play the game of DevOps but not actually do it. And a good example is if people are providing feedback in a group session but the feedback's not being applied, then you're not really doing DevOps. You're just going through the motions of DevOps. DevOps also includes, requires that builds and tests be automated, and that there be some investment in those tools as well. And I put those at the bottom because they're necessary, but the biggest requirement is the change in the culture and the team orientation process. And again, it's a continuous process of improvement. What worked for HP may not work for our company. We have to discover the DevOps processes that work best for us. And so as we go through this process, we'll continually need to refine what works and improve on the process. So I went through a SWOT analysis with Tina when she was here, and they came up with 4 different options we could use to start working on DevOps right away. And the 2 that I chose because of the duration of my course at Capella University and because of the material that's available for research or collaboration and documentation. The process of DevOps goes from involvement to integration. And as I said before, it's a cultural change. You're not going to be able to go straight to an integration process without changing the mindset of the team and getting them on board and engaged in the process. And so it starts off with involving everybody and then transitions to integrating the teams together into one single unit. So for collaboration, if we were to implement DevOps here in this organization, one of the first places we could start is collaboration. And as I said, this involves all the departments that we currently have. It involves the development, BSA's business, QA, and support operations working together as a team to develop applications. This obviously is going to be something new, and I think, Brad, you probably discovered a lot of things when you first started implementing Agile. But you need to respect everybody in the team, and also place our common values ahead of our own aspirations. So the common values obviously are going to be what's best for the company and how can we improve application development in the organization and provide a high quality product more often. As I said earlier, it's a one team approach that we're all together in it as a team, working together, and it requires oversight by the project managers and Scrum Masters, and what they would implement what's called a T-shaped management style, where the team is collaborating on ideas, but there's also independent responsibility involved as well. So everybody that's in the collaboration process has a responsibility. Nobody shows up empty-handed. And there's deliverables required from everybody, and the feedback that's provided needs to be reviewed by the team, and a consensus needs to come about it. So that whole process is overseen by the project managers or the Scrum Masters to make sure that we actually are doing DevOps and just not mimicking the process of DevOps. Collaboration should ideally be done 1 hour for every week of development, and it can occur in the sprint planning or retrospective processes or any other discussion and debate meetings. And it's a process of continuous improvement, as I talked about earlier. When we first begin this process of collaboration among all the teams, we may find that certain things don't work. That doesn't mean we give up on the process, but we improve it, we change it, we modify it, and we keep working on it till we find out the DevOps processes that work best for our team. This is something that we can start on right away. And doesn't require a great deal of change in what we're already doing. And this would begin with the involvement process, and later on transform into the integration process. Another area that we can start looking at for DevOps is the area of documentation, and in particular, dynamic documentation. So documentation is made up of knowledge, information, and data. And where data is our base elements, they are easiest to dynamically generate, and it becomes progressively more difficult to get information, which is a larger set of data sets joined together, and knowledge, which is, would be things like use cases and business rules. So for data in our current application, we can think of firm fee tables and IRA contribution tables as being data, and GSR settings as being like information. These are things that we're able to generate now, but we're not able to generate in an efficient manner. For instance, we have to, a lot of times if we want to get all the information for GSRs, we'll have to go to the developers and get a query written to obtain that information, put that in a ticket, send it off to IMSS. They'll generate the data for us, send it back to us, we'll review it. Sometimes that information isn't exactly what we're looking for, so we have to go back to the developers, have them refine the query, update the ticket, send it back to MISS, and then we finally get what we're looking for. It's a very inefficient process, and it's very time consuming. If we need information on how the settings are in place, it might take us a couple days to actually get that information. If we build this into the tool so that we can generate it ourselves, we can get that information right away. We'll have all the data sets available, all the information. The knowledge is a little bit more difficult, but it is doable. There are tools that you can do that, but it is error prone. But if we could do a big chunk of our data dynamically, we'll save a lot of time in documentation, keeping documentation updated, because it will always be up to date if we can dynamically generate it. Defects in categorization. So documenting defects and categorizing them. Right now, defects are written, added to the log, and then presented to the business for evaluation. The business picks out which defects that they want to recover, and then it goes to the developers to review. This puts up a roadblock for the developers to see how their code is behaving in the production environment. If they're able to look at all the defects that are occurring and not necessarily fix them, but just identify the errors in the code, when they are developing more code for the application, they'll be better able to create better code because they know of all the existing issues with the system. So it's important that the developers get that immediate feedback for all the defects in the system. Identification of common code. When we do have the defects, we can categorize them by different applications that are impacted. And so we could have ACHs and checks and wires, and if we focused on specific areas for recovery, the developers will be just looking at the common code for that particular module. Instead of currently, when we do defect recovery, we're picking out items from all over the application that touch many different code modules. But if we focus on individual code modules, we can recover more defects and have a better chance of creating good and reliable code the first time around. Continuous monitoring. This is where the support operations teams comes into play. And we can take some of the tools that are being created here for gathering data and information and display them on a dashboard. And this dashboard can be used to track the performance of the application at any given time. We can look at how many new requests are being created at any given time and compare that to historical values for that time slot. That way, if, for instance, if there's 200 requests being created at this time slot, and we notice that now there's only 50, there's probably a potential that there might be something wrong with this system. So a dashboard would be a good tool that would leverage what we're doing up here and display it dynamically. The other thing would be the gathering of logs and displaying those. For instance, the system has logs that are stored in log files, but if we could take those log files and be able to display them in a dashboard setting, we can see, the developers can be able to see how their code changes are being picked up by the air system. So if they notice that there's a spike in errors that are generated on the back end, they'll be able to see that and then be able to go into their code and make adjustments accordingly. Right now, I don't think that they have that ability. So by dynamically creating these dashboards and incorporating these options, we can improve the performance of the system. Another option would be auditing capabilities. So if we're gathering data dynamically and information, and we create a dashboard, we can create a dashboard for the auditors as well. So when they come next time we have an audit, if they want to gather some information, we can just provide them access to the dashboard, and they can pull all the information that they need dynamically, instead of us spending hours and hours trying to gather that information and provide it to them. So we can implement DevOps by starting with the low-hanging fruit of collaboration and documentation enhancement, and by doing this, we can improve the application development process for our organization. And so now I've reached the end of my presentation. Are there any questions or comments?
So what would you think is the time frame that you need to implement those changes?
It does take a long time. HP took 2 years to implement DevOps in their organization, and one of the reasons is because it's a cultural change in how you approach application development. So an example would be a mindset change of a developer when they're given the task to develop new code. In DevOps, one of the first things they would ask is, did we get feedback from support operations? Did we include the QA environment so that they can write the test modules for the code that we're writing? Are we including all the teams that could possibly be impacted by the code that we're developing? And the same thing applies to support operations. You know, when we find a defect, are we making sure that we get that out to the developers so that they can identify what happened with the code and not make the same mistakes in the future? And in order to get to that mindset where everybody's working together as a team, it does take a lot of time, and it takes a lot of effort and direction, as I said earlier, from management, and direction from the project managers and scrum masters.
So as a quick follow-up, then the 2 steps that you recommend, the collaboration and documentation, what's your estimate to have those implemented as part of that process? Is it about 2 years for the whole process, but for those 2 steps?
Sure, we can begin involvement right away.
Okay.
Involvement can be done immediately, and then as we start the process of involvement, we can find out what works, what doesn't work, and then change the process of how we're doing things until we reach a point where we're actually integrated. So it's a process of evolution. You don't just follow these 3 easy steps and you get there. You need to discover your DevOps processes that work for your environment.
Thanks.
So for documentation, have you guys thought of kind of the first things you'd like to see done to take that DevOps approach and make that better?
Yeah, so one of the first things we would like, the easiest thing to do is to target data, because that's usually in a table, and the goal would be to, first of all, any new data tables going forward should be able to be exported into a common format like Excel through the web interface. So for instance, the analytics tool that we have now, a lot of time, like the current GSR settings, it just shows one GSR setting on the screen but doesn't allow you to export it to Excel or export all of the settings. So if we had the ability to export everything to a common format like Excel, we could sort it, analyze it, do compares. Right now, it's very cumbersome to do that. So having the ability to export to a common format like Excel. Same thing with information. Information, as I described earlier, would be like dynamic GSR settings, because it's a lot more data compiled into something that makes sense, like how it flows through the system. And
sorry for the interruption, Sarkis. I am guessing that there is an actual presentation that you have. Maybe you're showing it in the room, but on the WebEx, it was just on the front page. Do you?
oh, it never changed.
Yeah, it's just showing the front page and saying implementing DevOps. So do you mind sending it to us or posting it somewhere?
Can you see it now?
Take a look at it.
Can you see it now?
I'm seeing the front page. It says implementing DevOps.
Maybe you could send the presentation, Tom, because I'd like to actually take a read through the whole thing too. I
Okay.
apologize for being
I apologize for that.
Oh, don't worry about it. It's not a problem. All right. Thank you so much.
All right,
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, maybe you and I could chat about this sometime, Tom, too, because I didn't get a chance to see the whole thing.
Okay.
I am interested in your thoughts in this area.
All right, thank you.
you probably didn't share the WebEx, you know?
Yeah, I
hit the
button, but I guess I've never turned